Alex had always lived a life surrounded by wealth and comfort. His family's grand estate sat at the edge of a prestigious neighborhood, far removed from the struggles of those less fortunate. The house itself was enormous, with sprawling gardens, marble floors, and every luxury imaginable. It was a life Alex had always known, a life where money seemed to solve every problem, and people were seen as either part of the family or part of the service. His parents, wealthy business owners, were often busy with work and social obligations. They had little time for Alex, so he spent most of his days on his own, being cared for by the various staff members his parents had hired to run the house. One of the staff was Mary, a middle-aged woman who had been with the family for years. Mary was the maid, and she took care of the cleaning, cooking, and laundry. She had a quiet, reserved presence that never seemed to call attention to herself. She worked hard, waking up early each day to make sure everything in the house was in perfect order, long before anyone else stirred. Alex had always seen Mary as nothing more than someone who was there to do the chores. He didn't think much of her, nor did he consider how hard her life might be. She was just another part of the routine, like the housekeeper or the gardener. She was a constant fixture in the background of his life, her presence mostly ignored unless she was in his way or needed something from him. At first, Alex never really interacted with her much. He was just a kid, caught up in his own world of private tutors, sports, and parties. But as he grew older, something about Mary began to annoy him. He didn't like the way she would speak to him politely, as if she was somehow beneath him. His friends would often joke about her, mocking her clothes and the way she spoke with her soft accent. Alex, who had been raised with a sense of superiority over everyone, felt he could join in too. He'd started calling her by demeaning nicknames when his parents weren't around, making little comments about how she should know her place. It was a small thing at first, just a few offhand remarks about her appearance or the way she carried herself. But soon, Alex's teasing became more direct. He would make jokes at her expense, loudly enough for her to hear, just to see her reaction. Alex had no idea what he was doing. He had always been surrounded by people who treated him like he was special, and he thought this behavior was just part of being the rich kid. To him, it was all a game, a harmless way to pass the time. But Mary never responded to Alex's comments. She kept her head down and continued with her work, as if she hadn't heard anything at all. She was used to being treated this way by others, as if she was invisible. Despite the hurtful things Alex would say, she remained respectful and patient. She had learned long ago that staying quiet was the best way to avoid conflict, especially with people like Alex, who had no idea what it was like to struggle. For Mary, the job was just one part of her life. She worked hard every day, not for the sake of wealth or recognition, but to make sure her own family was taken care of. She had dreams and hopes of a better life, but they didn't involve the house she worked in or the rich boy who never seemed to notice her as anything more than a servant. Yet, even though she was treated poorly by Alex, she never let it affect her ability to do her job with grace and dignity. The difference between them could not have been more apparent. Alex, born into privilege, took everything for granted, while Mary, who had worked hard her entire life, remained humble and focused on the task at hand. Little did Alex know, he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly through the large windows of the mansion, Alex wandered downstairs, already tired of the usual activities. His friends weren't coming over, and his parents were busy with meetings, so he had the house to himself. He walked aimlessly through the grand hallways, glancing at his phone, when he saw Mary in the kitchen, her back turned as she cleaned up after the family's breakfast. Alex, in his usual mood, decided to have some fun at her expense. He leaned against the doorway, watching her work for a moment before he spoke up in a mocking tone. "You really enjoy cleaning all day, huh? It must be such a glamorous job." Mary didn't respond right away. She continued wiping down the countertops, her movements slow and measured, as if she didn't hear him. Alex waited for a reaction, but she remained silent. Frustrated that she wasn't reacting the way he expected, Alex walked further into the kitchen. "You know, Mary, you're always working like this. Don't you ever get tired of being stuck here? I bet you don't even know what it's like to enjoy life like I do." At that, Mary paused for a moment, her eyes flicking briefly toward him before she went back to cleaning. Her calmness only made Alex more determined to get under her skin. "Come on, Mary, why don't you smile a little? I mean, I don't know how you can work all day and not even enjoy the privilege of being in such a nice place." Mary, who had heard countless similar comments over the years, just nodded slowly without looking at him. "It's just my job, Alex," she said, her voice soft but steady. Alex frowned, not satisfied with her response. He leaned closer, still speaking with that same mocking tone. "You really don't get it, do you? All of this," he waved a hand around, "could be yours if you just had some ambition. But I guess that's just not in your world, is it?" Mary's heart sank for a moment, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had heard many of these things before. She didn't respond, knowing it would only make things worse. Her job wasn't about ambition for her. It was about survival. It was about getting through each day to provide for her family. And that was enough for her. For a brief moment, Alex felt a strange pang of something, perhaps guilt or doubt, but he quickly dismissed it. He wasn't used to feeling bad for anyone, especially not for people who worked for him. After all, wasn't he just speaking the truth? He had been raised in a world where everything was handed to him, and he didn't understand why others couldn't make the same choices. To him, Mary was just another person in his life that he could talk down to, another part of the background that didn't really matter. Mary, however, didn't let his words get to her. She had learned long ago that there was no point in arguing with someone like Alex, someone who had no idea what real struggle felt like. Instead, she continued cleaning, focusing on her work. She had more important things to worry about than his insults. Alex, feeling the absence of any emotional reaction from her, let out a frustrated sigh and walked out of the room. He couldn't quite figure out why her indifference bothered him so much. Most people, especially the people he interacted with, would have responded by now, either angry or upset. But not Mary. She had a quiet strength that Alex couldn't quite understand. As he left the kitchen, a small thought lingered in his mind. For just a second, he wondered what Mary's life was like when she wasn't in his house. What did she do when she wasn't cleaning for him? He quickly shook off the thought. He had more important things to focus on, right? But the question remained, even if he didn't want to admit it. In the following days, Alex's interactions with Mary continued in much the same way. His usual comments and teasing were often met with silence, and it started to frustrate him. He couldn't understand why she didn't react like other people did. Most would argue back, show anger, or at least give him some sort of response that made him feel superior. But Mary, she simply kept working, never letting his words have an impact on her. One morning, Alex wandered into the living room, feeling particularly bored and restless. His parents were out again, and the house felt empty without them. As usual, he grabbed his phone and started scrolling through social media. The peaceful quiet of the house was interrupted by the sound of Mary's footsteps coming from the hallway. She was carrying a basket of laundry, her face calm and focused. Alex sat up on the couch and watched her approach. "Another busy day," Alex said, with a sarcastic edge to his voice. "How's life, Mary? You get a break ever?" Mary, still focused on her task, didn't look up at him. "There's always something to do," she replied simply, placing the basket on the floor. Alex couldn't help himself. He decided to keep pushing, just to see if he could get any reaction. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with mockery, "if you worked somewhere else, you could probably afford a better life. But then, I guess people like you are happy where you are, huh?" Mary paused for a moment, but then gently folded a shirt. She didn't even acknowledge his words at first. Alex was starting to wonder if she was ever going to speak up. He had expected her to say something back, to get angry at least, but she didn't. It was as if his words didn't even matter to her. The silence was unnerving, and Alex couldn't figure out why it bothered him so much. He continued, "I mean, I get it. You don't have much choice, do you? But still, don't you ever think about how much better things could be if you just tried harder?" Mary set the shirt down and turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of weariness in her eyes. She had heard these types of comments before, from others in the house and from people she met in her life. People who had no idea what it was like to struggle, to fight for each day. But she wasn't going to let Alex's words break her. "I do what I can," she said softly, her voice steady. "I don't need more than that." Alex stared at her for a moment. There was something in her words that made him pause. It wasn't the first time he had heard someone talk about doing the best with what they had, but for some reason, it felt different coming from her. She wasn't asking for anything more. She wasn't complaining. She was just quietly getting through her day, doing the work that needed to be done without any expectation of reward. It was almost as if she found peace in simply doing her job. Alex frowned, unsure of what to say next. His mind couldn't quite process it. Here was a woman who had so little in terms of material wealth, yet there was a strength in her that he couldn't explain. It wasn't something he had ever experienced in his own life, where everything had always been handed to him without question. Mary didn't wait for him to speak. She picked up the basket again and continued on her way, leaving Alex staring after her. He felt an odd mix of emotions, confusion, frustration, and a strange sense of guilt. He had never thought much about the lives of people like Mary. To him, they had always been just part of the background, people who were there to serve. But now, in the quiet of the house, with no one else around, something about her was making him think. For the first time, Alex started to realize how little he knew about the life she led. And strangely, he wanted to know more. He wasn't sure what had shifted in him, but he couldn't deny that something had. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself or the calmness in her voice, but he began to feel a tinge of respect that he had never felt before. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it was something he needed to think about. Days passed, and the unease inside Alex continued to grow. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about Mary's quiet strength stayed with him. He had spent so many years dismissing the people around him, convinced that his wealth and status were all that mattered. But now, there was a nagging feeling that he couldn't ignore. It felt like he was beginning to see people, especially Mary, for who they really were, not just as figures in his life, but as individuals with their own lives, stories, and struggles. It wasn't a big moment that caused this shift. It was more of a slow, quiet realization. He noticed the way Mary never complained, no matter how long the hours or how tiring the work. He noticed how she always put others before herself, never asking for recognition or reward. She did what she had to do with dignity, even when people like him treated her poorly. This made Alex uncomfortable in a way he hadn't experienced before. His whole life had been filled with people who did things for him, who made things easy for him. But Mary, she wasn't doing it for him or anyone else. She was simply living her life, doing the work that needed to be done, with a kind of grace that Alex could hardly understand. One evening, as he walked past the kitchen on his way to his room, Alex saw Mary sitting at the table, taking a short break from her work. She wasn't looking for attention or asking for a moment of rest. She was just sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she gazed out the window. The image struck him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't sadness or anger in her eyes, just calmness, a kind of peace that Alex hadn't ever seen in his own life. He wondered if she had ever been angry at her situation, or if she had always known how to live with what she had. He wondered if he could do the same. Without thinking, Alex walked into the kitchen. He wasn't sure why, but something was pulling him there. He didn't know if it was guilt or curiosity, but he felt the need to talk to her. "Mary," he said, his voice quieter than usual. You don't really say much about yourself, do you?" Mary looked up, surprised to hear him speak to her like this. She had gotten used to his jokes and remarks, but this tone was different. She smiled gently, the warmth in her expression softening the silence between them. "I don't have much to say, Alex," she replied. "I just do my job. There's not much else to it." Alex stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. He had never thought about it like that before. He had always been surrounded by people who talked about their dreams, their desires, their plans. But Mary didn't speak of such things. She didn't need to. Her life wasn't about grand ambitions or desires. It was about doing what she had to do, no matter the difficulty. I didn't know," Alex said, feeling awkward. "I never really thought about it, about how hard you work. I guess I never thought much about what you go through." Mary gave him a soft, understanding look. "It's not about what I go through, Alex. It's about what I have to do. Everyone has their own struggles, their own path. This is mine." Alex felt a strange knot in his chest. It was like a part of him that had been closed off for so long was slowly starting to open. He had always been so wrapped up in his own life, his own wants, that he had never stopped to truly understand the people around him. But now he was starting to see things differently. The quiet, steady way Mary went about her day, the lack of complaint, the simple acceptance of what was, he realized it was something he lacked. He had been chasing after things that didn't really matter, things that never brought him the satisfaction he thought they would. And here was Mary, a woman who had very little, but still seemed content with what she had. "I'm sorry," Alex muttered, his voice almost too quiet for her to hear, "for how I treated you." Mary didn't immediately respond, but there was a brief pause in the air, a silent understanding between them. She nodded, as if accepting his apology, but there was no need for more words. She had seen many people come and go in her life, and she knew that change often came slowly. Maybe Alex's apology wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward understanding something he had never thought about before. As Alex walked away, he felt a sense of discomfort mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite identify. But it didn't feel bad. In fact, it felt like the beginning of something important. For the first time, he realized that perhaps there was more to life than wealth, than status, than the things he had always taken for granted. Maybe, just maybe, the true value of life was found in moments like this. The quiet moments of understanding, of seeing the people around him for who they really were, and not just as figures in his own world. As the days went by, Alex found himself thinking more and more about his conversations with Mary. He couldn't stop reflecting on the way she had handled him, how she never once let his words affect her. He had always believed that wealth and power gave people an upper hand, that they could control the lives of others, but Mary's quiet dignity had made him question everything. She wasn't looking for anything from him, nor did she care about the privileges he took for granted. It was a lesson Alex hadn't expected to learn, and yet it was one he couldn't ignore. The realization made him uneasy, like he was slowly beginning to see through a lens he had never used before. He started to feel guilty for the things he had said to Mary, the way he had treated her. At first, it had been so easy for him to be cruel. He thought she was just someone there to serve him, someone he could dismiss without a second thought. But now it felt wrong. He had hurt her for no reason, and he knew it. One evening after dinner, Alex sat alone in the living room, his mind racing. He didn't know why it was bothering him so much, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to make things right. The guilt that had been building up over time had become unbearable. He had seen Mary in the kitchen again earlier that day, and her quiet, composed demeanor made him realize how much he had misunderstood her. She was far stronger than he had given her credit for, and he felt a deep sense of shame for treating her the way he had. Alex stood up from the couch, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he needed to apologize, but he wasn't sure how. It wasn't like he could just walk up to her and say the right words without sounding forced or insincere. but he knew he couldn't leave things the way they were. He had to do something. So he walked through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silent halls, and made his way to the kitchen. When he entered, Mary was washing the dishes, humming softly to herself as she worked. She didn't seem to notice him at first, and Alex hesitated. This was it. He had to speak up, but what if she didn't want to hear him? What if she was still angry? The thought made his stomach turn, but he pushed it away. He had to try. "Mary," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned her head, surprised to see him standing there. "Can we talk?" Mary set the dish down and wiped her hands on the towel, giving him a curious look. "Of course, Alex. What's on your mind?" For a moment, Alex didn't know how to begin. The words felt heavy in his mouth, but he knew he had to say them. I've been thinking a lot lately about everything I said to you and how I've treated you. And I just want to say I'm sorry." Mary was silent for a moment, her eyes studying him carefully. She wasn't sure what to say either. She had grown used to people's behavior, people who never apologize for their actions, who never seemed to understand the harm they caused. But there was something different in Alex's tone. It wasn't the usual arrogance or mockery. There was genuine remorse in his words. "I've been wrong," Alex continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I've treated you like you were less than me, like you didn't matter. But the truth is, I've learned that you're far more than I ever realized, and I'm really sorry for making you feel bad for something that wasn't your fault." Mary looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the apology she had expected, but it was enough. She nodded slowly, accepting his words. "Thank you, Alex," she said quietly. "It's not easy to say what you just did, and I appreciate it." Alex felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had done something right. It wasn't about making things perfect or erasing the past, but it was a step toward making things better. And that was enough for now. As he turned to leave the kitchen, he realized something he hadn't thought about before. He didn't need to feel superior to others to feel good about himself. It was in moments like this, in understanding and acknowledging his mistakes, that he felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. And he knew, deep down, that he had started to change. After that evening, something in Alex seemed to shift. The guilt that had been weighing on him slowly began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. His thoughts were no longer consumed by his wealth or the things he had always thought defined his life. Instead, he found himself thinking about Mary, her quiet strength, and the way she had carried herself despite everything he had thrown at her. He didn't fully understand why, but he felt a need to be different, to be better. It was as if a door had opened, and he could finally see the world in a new way. One afternoon, a few days after their conversation in the kitchen, Alex decided to take a walk. He wandered through the large garden behind his house, a space that he often overlooked, always busy with something else. But today, he didn't want to be surrounded by the lavishness of the estate. He wanted to clear his mind, to focus on what mattered beyond all the material things. As he walked along the stone path, the weight of his thoughts grew heavier. He had been trying to figure out what had changed inside him. It wasn't just the apology to Mary. It was more than that. It was the way he had started seeing the world, how he had begun noticing the people around him. Really noticing them. People like Mary had always been invisible to him, just part of the background. But now, he couldn't stop thinking about how they lived, how they worked, and the things they faced every day without ever complaining. While walking, he passed by the small bench near the fountain where he had seen Mary sitting just a few days ago. The memory of her calm presence came back to him, and for a moment, he felt a deep sense of respect for her. It wasn't just her work ethic that had stood out to him. It was her quiet dignity, her ability to hold her head high even when others treated her like she was nothing more than a servant. She didn't demand attention or pity. She simply did what needed to be done, and in doing so, she had earned something Alex had never truly understood: genuine self-respect. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around to see Mary, walking in the direction of the garden. She was carrying a basket of flowers, her head down, as she carefully selected the blooms. Alex hesitated for a moment, then walked toward her. The last time they had spoken, there had been an awkwardness, but now he felt more at ease, as though the air between them had cleared. "Mary," he called out, and she looked up in surprise. "Oh, Alex, I didn't see you there," she said, offering a polite smile. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Alex said, feeling a little uncertain. I wanted to thank you again. For everything. You've been patient with me, even when I didn't deserve it." Mary looked at him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "There's no need to thank me. I'm just doing my job." "I know," Alex replied quickly, "but it's more than that. You've been teaching me things I didn't even realize I needed to learn. I've been so caught up in my own world that I never thought about how others live, how people like you have to work harder just to survive, while I've had everything handed to me without ever having to think twice." Mary didn't say anything right away. She seemed to be processing his words, and for a moment, they both stood there in silence. The sounds of the garden, birds chirping, leaves rustling, filled the air. It was peaceful, the calmness between them almost a reflection of the changes happening inside Alex. "I'm not doing anything special, Alex," Mary finally said. "I'm just trying to get by, like everyone else. We all have our struggles, in different ways." Alex nodded, his mind racing with her words. He felt a deep respect for her humility. She didn't see herself as anything extraordinary, but to him she was. She had been strong in ways he had never known how to be. He couldn't imagine facing life's challenges with the same quiet grace that she did. "Thank you, Mary," Alex said again, this time with more sincerity than ever before, "for showing me what really matters." Mary smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You're welcome, Alex." As she walked away, Alex stood there for a moment longer, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He knew that he still had a long way to go to fully understand what Mary had shown him, but he felt like he was on the right path. For the first time, he felt like he was truly seeing the world and the people around him, not through the lens of wealth or status, but as they truly were, and that, in itself. Days passed after their conversation in the garden, and Alex found himself reflecting more and more on the things he had learned from Mary. He was no longer so absorbed in his own world. The luxury, the parties, and the comfort that had once defined his life now seemed shallow in comparison to the deeper understanding he was beginning to gain about the people around him. One afternoon, as Alex sat in the living room, his thoughts drifted back to Mary. He had noticed how she had always been calm and composed, never asking for anything more than what was necessary. He had seen how her work was endless, but she never complained, never sought attention. Alex began to realize that he had been blind to the world of people like her, those who had to work hard every day to make ends meet. And now he wanted to make things right, to do something meaningful to show his appreciation. He got up from the couch and walked toward the kitchen, determined to do something that would help Mary, even in a small way. When he entered, he saw her wiping down the counters, moving with the same steady rhythm that Alex had come to recognize. She glanced up, surprised to see him standing there. But she quickly gave him a polite smile. "Mary, I've been thinking a lot," Alex said, hesitating slightly. "I know that I've treated you badly in the past, and I want to do something to make it right. I don't know how, but I'd like to help you with something. Maybe you could let me help around the house for once." Mary paused, clearly surprised by his offer. She set the dish down and gave him a curious look, as if trying to understand his sudden change in behavior. "Help? But you don't have to do that, Alex. You're busy enough with everything else. I'm fine." "I know you're fine," Alex replied quickly. "But I want to. I don't want to just sit here and let you do everything. You've been so patient with me, and I want to show that I respect you. I don't want to be the person I was." Mary looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. She had always been a quiet observer, but this time, there was something different in her gaze. She saw the sincerity in Alex's eyes, and the way his tone had softened. It wasn't the usual arrogance, nor the mocking words she had heard so many times before. For once, Alex seemed to understand her, understand what it meant to work hard every day without seeking praise. "Well, if you really want to help, there's always something that needs doing," she said with a small smile. "The garden could use some attention, or you could help me with the laundry. But I don't want you to feel like you have to do this, Alex." "I want to," he insisted. "I need to learn what it means to actually do something for someone else, not just sit back and let everyone take care of things for me." Mary hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if you're serious about it, I'll show you what needs to be done." Together, they worked side by side, Mary guiding Alex through the tasks. He wasn't used to hard work, and at first, he stumbled through the chores, unsure of what to do. But as the afternoon wore on, he found himself getting the hang of it. The feeling of doing something with his own hands, of contributing to the work that Mary had been doing all along, was something Alex had never experienced before. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. As they finished up the chores, Alex felt a sense of satisfaction that was different from the fleeting pleasure of a new toy or the thrill of a party. This was real. This was tangible. And most importantly, it was a moment of connection between him and Mary. She had shown him more than just the value of hard work. She had shown him the power of humility and respect. "I never realized how much you do around here," Alex said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "I've been so blind to it all. I'm sorry I never appreciated it before." Mary smiled, a soft, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge his effort without saying a word. She wasn't looking for thanks or praise. She was just glad that he had come to see things for what they were. "You're learning," she said quietly. "That's what matters." As Alex walked away from the kitchen that evening, a sense of contentment filled him. It wasn't just about the work they had done together. It was about the change that was happening inside him. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt that he was truly becoming a better person, not because he had everything, but because he was finally starting to understand what really mattered. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And that was enough for now. As the days continued to pass, Alex found himself feeling more at ease with the changes he had made in his life. The guilt he had once carried seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. His relationship with Mary, which had started off on the wrong foot, had grown into something much deeper. It wasn't just about working together or apologizing for past mistakes. It was about understanding each other in a way Alex had never thought possible before. He had learned what it meant to truly see someone, to recognize their worth beyond what they did for him. One evening after dinner, Alex sat in his favorite spot by the window, looking out over the garden. His thoughts wandered to Mary, to the quiet moments they had shared, and to how much she had taught him in such a short time. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward her. She had shown him a side of life he had never known, a life of resilience, hard work, and quiet strength. She had never asked for anything from him, yet she had given him so much, far more than he had ever expected or realized he needed. But it wasn't just about the lessons he had learned. It was about the person he was becoming. Alex had always been surrounded by people who praised him for his wealth, his looks, and his achievements. Yet none of that had ever made him feel truly fulfilled. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was becoming someone he could respect. He wasn't defined by his family's money or his status anymore. Instead, he was beginning to understand that true worth came from within, from kindness, humility, and the way you treated others. Mary had been patient with him, teaching him without saying a word. She had shown him that it wasn't enough to simply go through life taking from others. It was about giving, understanding, and showing respect. And while Alex still had a long way to go, He knew that he was on the right path. The next morning, as Alex walked through the house, he spotted Mary in the hallway. She was carrying a stack of towels, her face calm and focused as usual. Without thinking, Alex walked over to her. "Hey, Mary," he said, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for me, about how much you've helped me understand things, and I just wanted to say thank you again. You've taught me more than I could have imagined." Mary paused, looking up at him with a gentle smile. She had always been a quiet presence in the house, but now there was a warmth in her eyes that Alex hadn't noticed before. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. "I just did my job." Alex shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You helped me see the world differently. I didn't understand what it meant to work hard, to live with integrity, or to truly respect people. But now I do. And that's because of you." Mary smiled, but there was a quiet humility in her expression. She didn't want praise, but there was something in Alex's words that made her feel seen, in a way she hadn't felt before. "I'm just glad you're learning." For a moment, they stood in silence, simply looking at each other. There was no need for more words. Alex had already said what he needed to say, and Mary had already given him more than enough in return. Their relationship had grown from one of discomfort and misunderstanding to one of mutual respect, and that was enough. As the days went on, Alex continued to change. He helped around the house more, not out of obligation, but because he truly wanted to. He began to understand the importance of doing things for others, of putting in the effort, and of showing gratitude for the people who made his life better. Whether it was Mary or anyone else, it wasn't always easy, and he wasn't perfect, but he was trying. In the end, Alex learned that life wasn't about having the most wealth or the most power. It was about being kind, understanding, and respectful toward others. He had spent so much of his life focused on things that didn't matter, but now he was finally beginning to understand what truly made life meaningful, and he knew that as long as he kept learning, kept growing, he would continue to become the person he was meant to be.